The rain hit like needles. Lydia couldn't feel her hands anymore. They'd gone numb somewhere around mile 8, locked rigid around leather reins that had turned slick and treacherous. The mare beneath her, her mother's mare, the only thing of value she'd taken besides her own life, was faltering. Lydia felt it in the animal's gait, the way her hooves skidded on mud that had turned the prairie into a skating rink. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Behind her, Marcus Hartwell's men would be mounting up by now. Her stepfather didn't tolerate defiance, especially not from a girl who'd just cost him $500 and a land deal with the Brennan Ranch. The marriage contract had been simple: Lydia for access to water rights and 70 head of cattle. She was 19. Clayton Brennan was 53, with 2 dead wives already in the ground and a reputation for a temper that had left more than one hired hand limping. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow. Was. Past tense. Because Lydia had climbed out her bedroom window at midnight with nothing but her mother's old riding coat and a decade of stored-up rage. Thunder rolled overhead, so loud it felt like the sky was tearing apart. The mare whinnied, high and frightened, and Lydia leaned forward, pressing her face against the animal's soaked neck. "I know," she said into the wind. "I know. Just a little further." Further to where, she had no idea. The storm had swallowed the stars. No moon, no landmarks, just rain and darkness and the animal panic driving her forward. Her mother had told her once about an outpost near the northern ravines, a place where the mail route riders stopped to change horses. Said there was a man there who didn't ask questions. But that had been years ago, and Lydia had been 12, and she hadn't paid enough attention because she'd never imagined needing to run. Stupid. She'd been so stupid. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of brightness, Lydia saw it, a dark shape against the hillside. Not natural. Too angular. Man-made. A cabin. She pulled the reins hard and the mare nearly went down, hooves scrambling on the slope. Lydia held on, her thighs burning with the effort of staying mounted. The cabin, if that's what it was, sat maybe 200 yards off, nestled against a rock face that would have been invisible in the dark. It was a risk. Every building out here belonged to someone, and that someone might have already heard about Marcus Hartwell's runaway stepdaughter, might have been offered money to send her back. But the mare was done, and Lydia's teeth were chattering so hard she'd bitten her tongue, the taste of blood mixing with rainwater. Risk or freeze to death. Not much of a choice. She urged the horse forward. Up close, the cabin looked abandoned. No light in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. But there was a lean-to stable on the side, barely more than a roof and 3 walls, and Lydia managed to guide the mare under it before sliding off. Her legs nearly buckled. She caught herself against the horse's flank, breathing hard, water streaming off her hair and into her eyes. "Stay quiet," she whispered to the mare, though the animal looked too exhausted to do anything but stand there, head low. Lydia pulled the saddle off with shaking hands and left it on the ground. Then she turned toward the cabin. The door was locked. Of course it was. Lydia stood there for a moment, rain hammering against her back, and felt something dangerous rise in her chest. Not fear, not anymore. Just raw, furious desperation. She picked up a rock from the ground and smashed the window. The glass shattered with a sound that felt too loud even against the storm. Lydia froze, waiting for shouting, for movement, for anything. Nothing. She reached through, careful of the jagged edges, and found the latch. The window swung open. Getting inside was awkward. Her coat caught on broken glass, and she scraped her shin hard enough to draw blood. But she managed. Tumbled onto a wooden floor that smelled like old smoke and leather and something else. Something lived in. Someone lived here. Lydia stayed on her hands and knees, heart slamming against her ribs, waiting for her eyes to adjust. The cabin was one room, small. A wood stove in the corner, cold. A table, one chair. A cot against the far wall, neatly made. Shelves with supplies. Canned goods, a tin coffee pot, ammunition boxes stacked with military precision. A route rider's cabin then, just like her mother had said. Relief nearly knocked her flat. She crawled to the stove, found matches on the shelf above it, and got a fire started with hands that barely cooperated. The kindling was dry, thank God, and within minutes she had flames. Heat. The sudden warmth hurt, prickling against her frozen skin like 1,000 tiny knives. But Lydia didn't care. She stripped off her soaked coat and hung it on the back of the chair, then stood as close to the stove as she dared, shivering violently. Outside, the storm raged on. Lydia didn't let herself think about what she'd done. Breaking and entering. Horse theft, technically, even if the mare had been her mother's first. Running from a legal marriage contract. Marcus would call it breach of agreement. Clayton Brennan would call it theft of property. His property, since he'd already paid. The law wouldn't be on her side. But then, the law had never been on her side. Not when her mother died under mysterious circumstances 3 years ago and the doctor ruled it an accident. Not when Marcus took control of the estate and started selling off everything that wasn't nailed down. Not when he'd announced Lydia's engagement to Clayton Brennan without asking her, without even pretending she had a choice. No. The law protected men like Marcus Hartwell. Girls like Lydia were just currency. She was so tired. The fire crackled and Lydia sank down onto the floor in front of it, pulling her knees to her chest. Her dress was still soaked, clinging cold and miserable against her skin, but she couldn't muster the energy to care. Her eyes burned. Everything hurt. Just for a minute, she told herself. Just sit here for a minute, get warm, then figure out what to do next. Her eyelids drooped. The door slammed open. Lydia scrambled backward, heart in her throat, and found herself staring at a man silhouetted in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, holding a rifle that was very much pointed at her. "Don't move," he said. His voice was flat, calm, the kind of calm that came from being very, very sure of yourself. Lydia's back hit the wall. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The man stepped inside, water streaming off his long coat, and kicked the door shut behind him. He didn't lower the rifle. His eyes swept the cabin, the broken window, the fire, her wet coat hanging on his chair, and his jaw tightened. "You're bleeding on my floor," he said. Lydia looked down, her shin, where she'd scraped it climbing through the window. Blood had soaked through her stocking, dripping onto the wood. Her voice came out hoarse. "I'm sorry, there was a storm. I noticed." He still hadn't lowered the rifle. Lydia forced herself to meet his eyes, dark eyes, hard to read in the firelight. His face was all angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked maybe 30, maybe older. The kind of face that didn't give anything away. "Are you going to shoot me?" Lydia asked. "Haven't decided yet." The answer should have terrified her. Instead, somewhere in the back of her exhausted, half-frozen brain, Lydia felt a spark of anger. "Well, decide fast," she said. "Because if you're going to do it, I'd rather not waste time wondering." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. He lowered the rifle, not all the way, but enough that it wasn't aimed directly at her chest anymore. "What are you doing in my cabin?" "Surviving," Lydia said. "Or trying to." "By breaking my window. I'll pay for it." "With what?" Good question. Lydia's fingers found the small leather pouch she'd tied to her belt. The kitchen cash box money. $43, last time she'd counted. Everything she had in the world. "I have money," she said. The man's expression didn't change. He set the rifle against the wall within easy reach and shrugged out of his wet coat. Underneath, he wore dark trousers and a work shirt that had seen better days. His boots were caked in mud. "You're running," he said. It wasn't a question. Lydia's throat tightened. "That's not your business. It is when you're in my cabin." "I didn't know it was occupied. The place looked abandoned." "Because I was out checking traps." He moved to the stove, added more wood to the fire with practiced efficiency. "Storm caught me a mile out. Had to wait it out in a cave before I could make it back." Lucky her. He straightened, turning to face her again, and Lydia saw him really look at her for the first time, taking in her ruined dress, her soaked hair plastered to her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the blood on her shin. His expression softened. Barely. But enough. "You hurt anywhere else?" he asked. Lydia shook her head. "Your horse?" "In the lean-to, Lydia's voice cracked. "She's exhausted. I rode her too hard." The man nodded slowly. He crossed to the shelves, pulled down a tin cup and a bottle of something dark, poured 2 fingers and held it out to her. "Drink this." Lydia eyed the cup warily. "What is it?" "Whiskey, medicinal." She took it. The first sip burned all the way down, but the second one spread warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. She coughed, and the man's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Name's Caleb Mercer," he said. "Route rider for the Northern Mail Circuit." Lydia hesitated. Giving her name felt dangerous, but he'd already seen her face and lying seemed pointless. "Lydia Hartwell." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Hartwell. Marcus Hartwell's girl?" Her stomach dropped. "You know him? Know of him? Big ranch, lots of land. Heard he was marrying off his daughter to Clayton Brennan." "Stepdaughter," Lydia said quietly. "And no, he's not." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the cot, pulled a blanket off it, and tossed it to her. "You're shaking," he said. "Change out of that wet dress before you catch pneumonia. I'll check on your horse." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Wait," Lydia said. Caleb paused, hand on the latch. "Are you going to turn me in?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the drum of rain on the roof. "Get warm," Caleb said finally. "We'll talk after." Then he was gone. Lydia sat there clutching the blanket, listening to his footsteps fade into the storm. Her hands were still shaking, but not from cold anymore. She'd just gambled her life on a stranger's mercy, and she had no idea if she'd made the right choice. Caleb stood in the lean-to, running his hands over the mare's legs, checking for injuries. The animal was in rough shape, lathered, trembling, one shoe loose, but nothing broken. Nothing that rest and food wouldn't fix. He'd ridden horses to exhaustion before, usually running from something. The girl, Lydia, was terrified. Trying to hide it, but terrified. He'd seen it in her eyes when he'd walked in, the way she'd gone very still, like a rabbit freezing in front of a wolf, and then that flash of defiance when she'd asked if he was going to shoot her. Brave, or desperate enough to pretend. Caleb finished with the mare, made sure she had water, and headed back to the cabin. Through the window, the one Lydia hadn't broken, he could see her silhouette by the fire. She'd wrapped herself in the blanket, her wet dress discarded on the floor. Just sitting there, staring into the flames. He should send her back. Marcus Hartwell was powerful, connected, the kind of man who could make life very difficult for someone who crossed him. Harboring his runaway stepdaughter would qualify. But Caleb had met Clayton Brennan once, 2 years ago, at a trading post. The man had been drunk, loud, and mean, grabbed a Lakota woman by the wrist when she'd tried to walk past him, pulled her close, and said something that made her go pale. Caleb had stepped in. Brennan had taken a swing at him. It hadn't ended well for Brennan. If Lydia was running from that, Caleb opened the door. She looked up, eyes wide and wary. She'd put the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl, and her hair was starting to dry in dark waves around her face, younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 19. 20 at most. "Your horse will be all right," Caleb said. "She needs rest." "Thank you." He shrugged out of his coat again, hung it on a peg by the door, moved to the shelves and pulled down jerky, hardtack, a can of beans, started preparing something that might pass for a meal. Lydia watched him work. "Why haven't you asked?" she said finally. "Asked what?" "Why I ran." Caleb dumped the beans into a pot, set it on the stove. "Figure that's your business." "Most people would be curious." "I'm not most people." Silence. Then, "Clayton Brennan hits women. Did you know that?" Caleb's hand stilled on the pot. He didn't turn around. "I'd heard rumors. They're not rumors. His first wife fell down the stairs. Broke her neck. His second wife. They said she got kicked by a horse, but she had bruises on her arms shaped like fingers." Lydia's voice was steady, but Caleb heard the tremor underneath. "My stepfather sold me to him for water rights. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow morning." Caleb turned to face her. Lydia met his gaze. Her chin was up, but her hands were fisted in the blanket, knuckles white. "So no," she said quietly. "I'm not going back." Caleb studied her, the defiance in her eyes, the fear underneath it. He'd been in the war, seen what happened to people who didn't have choices, seen what they became. "All right," he said. Lydia blinked. "All right? You can stay here tonight. Storm should clear by morning. After that," he stirred the beans, watching them heat. After that, you'll need a plan. I have a plan. Breaking into cabins and hoping for the best isn't a plan. Her jaw tightened. I'm going to the outpost. My mother told me there's a place there. Documents. Something about... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter. I just need to get there. The northern outpost? Yes. That's 3 days' ride through open country. I know. Your stepfather's men will be looking for you. I know that too. Caleb divided the beans between 2 tin plates, added jerky and hardtack, handed one to Lydia. She took it with a quiet thank you, and ate like someone who hadn't seen food in a while. Probably hadn't. He sat down in the chair, leaving her the floor by the fire, ate his own meal in silence. Outside, the storm was finally starting to ease. The thunder had moved on, and the rain had softened to a steady patter. Why are you helping me? Lydia asked suddenly. Caleb looked at her. Haven't decided if I am yet. You gave me food. Let me stay. For tonight. But why? He set his plate aside. You ever been to war, Miss Hartwell? The question seemed to throw her. No. I have. Spent 4 years watching men make decisions about other people's lives. Who lived, who died, who got sold, who got sacrificed. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. Got tired of it. Lydia's expression shifted, something like understanding. So you're just a good person? Caleb almost laughed. No, just tired of watching people get crushed by bastards with power. The bluntness made her flinch. Then, slowly, she smiled. Small and sad and genuine. My mother would have liked you, she said. Would she? She didn't trust anyone, but she had good instincts about people. Lydia pulled the blanket tighter. She died 3 years ago. Fell into the river and drowned, or that's what they said. You don't believe it. The river was low. She'd crossed it 100 times. Lydia's voice went flat. Marcus married her for the ranch. When she died, he got everything. And then he started selling pieces off. First the cattle, then the land, then... She swallowed. Then me. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. This thing your mother left at the outpost, he said carefully. You think it's proof? I don't know. Maybe. She told me once, if anything ever happened to her, I should go there. Find a man named William Cross. He'd know what to do. William Cross runs the outpost, Caleb said. Knew your mother? They were friends. Before she married my father, before... Lydia trailed off, staring into the fire again. I was too young to understand, but I remember her writing letters, hiding them, and then she stopped. After my father died and Marcus showed up, pieces clicking into place, a woman with secrets, a sudden, convenient death, a man who inherited everything. Caleb had seen variations of this story before. They never ended well. 3 days to the outpost, he said. You'll never make it alone. Lydia's head snapped up. I'll manage. On an exhausted horse with no supplies and men hunting you? I said I'll manage. Stubborn. But stubborn wouldn't keep her alive. Caleb made a decision he'd probably regret. I'll take you, he said. Lydia stared at him. What? I'll take you to the outpost. I know the trails, know how to move without being seen. Better odds than you going alone. Why would you? Because you're right. Clayton Brennan is a bastard, and your stepfather is worse for selling you to him. Caleb stood, crossed to the window to check the sky. Clouds breaking apart, stars starting to show. And because I'm headed that direction anyway, mail route. It was half a lie. His route didn't technically go through the northern outpost this month, but it could. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. I can pay you, she said finally. I have money. Keep it. You'll need it more than I do. Then why help me at all? Caleb turned to look at her. Firelight caught in her hair, turned her eyes amber. She looked very young and very, very tired. Your mother was right, he said. If something happens to you, people like Marcus Hartwell win, and I'm tired of watching them win. Lydia's throat worked. She nodded once, sharp. When do we leave? Dawn. Storm will be clear by then, and we'll want the early light. He moved to the shelves, started pulling down supplies. Get some sleep. You'll need it. Where will you? Floor's fine. Take the cot. I can't. Miss Hartwell. Caleb's voice was firm. You're exhausted, injured, and running for your life. Take the damn cot. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stood, still wrapped in the blanket, and crossed to the cot. Sat down on the edge. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb grunted. He laid out his bedroll on the floor by the fire, checked his rifle one more time, and settled in. The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling fire and the last whispers of rain. Caleb didn't sleep. Not really. He dozed surface light, the way he'd learned during the war, aware of every sound, every shift in the air. Across the room, Lydia's breathing eventually evened out, deep and slow. Finally asleep. Caleb stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell he'd just signed up for. Marcus Hartwell wasn't a man who let things go. If he wanted his stepdaughter back, and the money she represented, he'd send more than a few ranch hands. He'd send hunters, men who knew how to track, how to kill. And Caleb had just put himself directly in their path. He should wake her up, send her on her way, let her make her own mistakes and live with her own consequences. But he'd meant what he said. He was tired of watching people like Hartwell win, even if it got him killed. Outside, the storm finally died. The clouds parted and moonlight spilled through the broken window, painting silver across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Caleb closed his eyes and tried to rest. Tomorrow, they'd run. And hope like hell they were faster than whatever was coming behind them. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt more like a threat than a promise. Lydia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement. Caleb at the stove, methodical and quiet. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The storm, the cabin. The stranger who'd agreed to help her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. She sat up, and Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Coffee's ready," he said. "Get dressed. We leave in 20 minutes." No good morning, no pleasantries, just the facts. Lydia's dress had dried overnight, stiff and wrinkled, but it was better than nothing. She changed quickly behind the minimal privacy of the blanket, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. Her shin still throbbed where she'd scraped it, and when she looked down, she saw the bruise had spread, dark purple against pale skin. It didn't matter. Pain she could handle. By the time she emerged, Caleb had packed 2 saddlebags with supplies: jerky, hardtack, coffee, ammunition. His rifle leaned against the table, cleaned and loaded. He handed her a tin cup of coffee without comment, and Lydia wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. "How far can we get today?" she asked. "Depends on how hard they're looking." Caleb moved to the broken window, scanning the horizon. "If we're lucky, they'll assume you headed south toward the rail line. If we're not..." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Lydia sipped her coffee, studying him in the growing light. He looked different than he had last night, less threatening, more tired. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, and his hands, when he reached for his own cup, bore scars she hadn't noticed before, old wounds, long healed. "You were in the war," she said. "Not a question." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "Which side?" "Does it matter?" "Maybe." He turned to face her, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then he said, "Union, 4th Cavalry. Spent most of it in Tennessee and Georgia." Lydia nodded slowly. Her father had fought too, though she'd been too young to remember him coming home. He died when she was 7. Pneumonia, the doctor said, though her mother had always looked skeptical when anyone mentioned it. "My father was a soldier," she said quietly, "before the ranch." "That how your mother ended up out here?" "She followed him. They were going to build something together. And then he died, and she was alone with a daughter and a piece of land she didn't know how to work." Lydia stared into her coffee. Marcus showed up 6 months later, offered to help. She was desperate enough to say yes. And then she married him. And then she was trapped. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Caleb finished his coffee and set the cup down with a decisive clink. "We need to move. Sun's up." They worked in efficient silence, packing the last of the supplies, checking the horses. Lydia's mare looked better after a night's rest, though still worn. Caleb's gelding was a sturdy gray with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition, The kind of horse that wouldn't spook easily. Stay close, Caleb said as they mounted up. If I signal you to stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run, and you don't look back. Understood? Lydia wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't some helpless girl who needed protecting. But the truth was, she had no idea what she was doing out here. Caleb did. Understood, she said. They rode out as the sun broke over the hills, painting the wet prairie gold and amber. The storm had left everything fresh and clean, but it had also turned the ground treacherous. Mud sucked at the horses' hooves, and more than once Lydia felt her mare slip before catching herself. Caleb led them northwest, avoiding the main trails. They cut through ravines and creek beds, staying low where the land would hide them. He moved like someone who knew every rock and tree, every place where the earth dipped enough to conceal a rider. They didn't talk. Sound carried out here, and silence was safer. By mid-morning, Lydia's back was aching and her hands were blistered from gripping the reins. She'd ridden before. Every girl who grew up on a ranch knew how to sit a horse. But never like this. Never for hours without stopping. Never with the constant awareness that every ridge could hide someone watching. Caleb called a halt in a narrow canyon where a trickle of water still ran from the storm. He dismounted, checked the horses, then gestured for Lydia to do the same. "Drink," he said, pointing to the stream. "We won't stop again until sundown." Lydia slid off her mare with a groan she couldn't quite suppress. Her legs felt like jelly. She knelt by the water and drank from her cupped hands, the cold shocking against her dry throat. Caleb crouched beside her, filling his canteen. "You holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're limping." "I said I'm fine." He gave her a look that suggested he didn't believe her but wasn't going to argue. Instead, he stood, scanning the canyon rim with narrowed eyes. "Something wrong?" Lydia asked. "Not sure yet." The answer sent ice down her spine. She followed his gaze but saw nothing, just rocks and scrub brush and empty sky. "What do you see?" "Nothing. That's the problem." Caleb's hand rested on his rifle. "Too quiet. Birds should be making noise this time of day." Lydia listened. He was right. The canyon was silent except for the trickle of water and the soft sound of the horses breathing. "Could be a predator," Caleb said, more to himself than to her. "Mountain lion, maybe." Or a sound echoed off the canyon walls. Distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Caleb's expression went flat. "Mount up, now." Lydia didn't argue. She scrambled onto her mare, her heart suddenly hammering. Caleb was already moving, leading them deeper into the canyon where the walls narrowed and the shadows grew thick. "How many?" Lydia whispered. "At least 3. Maybe more." He glanced back at her. "Could be nothing. Could be hunters. Could be Marcus's men." "Yeah." They pressed forward, and Lydia forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly. Panic wouldn't help. Panic would get her killed. The canyon twisted and Caleb guided them into a split so narrow the horses' flanks brushed the rock on both sides. Lydia had to duck to avoid overhanging stone, and for a horrible moment she thought they'd gotten stuck, trapped like rats in a maze. Then the passage opened up into a small box canyon, barely 20 feet across, with sheer walls on 3 sides. "Dead end," Lydia said, her voice tight. "No!" Caleb pointed to a crack in the rock face, barely visible behind a tangle of brush. "Through there. It's tight, but the horses can make it." "How do you know?" "Used it before, during the war, running dispatches." He dismounted, started pulling the brush aside. "Come on, we don't have much time." Lydia slid off her mare and helped him clear the opening. Up close, she could see he was right. There was a passage, narrow and dark, cutting through the rock. It looked barely wide enough for a man, let alone a horse. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "No, but it's this or face whoever's coming." The hoofbeats were getting louder. Caleb went first, leading his gelding into the darkness. The horse balked, ears flat, but Caleb spoke to it in a low, steady voice and the animal followed. Lydia watched them disappear into shadow, and then there was nothing but the sound of their passage and her own racing pulse. She took her mare's reins and stepped into the crack. Darkness swallowed her whole. The passage was tight, tighter than she'd expected. Rock pressed against her shoulders on both sides, and she had to turn sideways to squeeze through, the mare snorting nervously behind her. She couldn't see anything. Not Caleb, not the way forward, Nothing but blackness and the suffocating weight of stone. Her breathing went shallow. She'd never liked small spaces, and this was a nightmare, buried alive in rock with no way out, and men with guns somewhere behind her. Keep moving, Caleb's voice, ahead in the dark. Calm. Steady. 20 more feet. 20 feet. She could do 20 feet. Lydia pushed forward, one hand on the wall, the other gripping the mare's reins. Her dress caught on something and tore with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. The mare whinnied, high and frightened, and Lydia's heart stopped. Easy, she whispered. Easy, girl. Almost through. Light. Dim and gray, but light. The passage opened up, and suddenly Lydia could breathe again. She stumbled out into another canyon, this one wider, with a thin stream running through it and cottonwoods growing along the banks. Caleb was already there, checking his horse. You all right? He asked. Lydia nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. We need to keep moving. This canyon runs north for about a mile before it joins up with the main valley. If we're lucky, they'll waste time searching the box canyon before they figure out we went through. And if we're not lucky, then we run. They mounted up again and followed the stream north, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The canyon walls rose high on either side, blocking out most of the sky, and the shadows felt oppressive. Lydia kept glancing back, expecting to see riders appear at any moment. But the canyon stayed empty. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the walls began to slope down, and the canyon widened into a valley dotted with sage and juniper. Caleb didn't slow down. He kept them moving at a steady pace, always watching, always listening. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, he called another halt in a grove of trees near a dried-up riverbed. We'll rest here, he said. Noon heat will cover our tracks some. Lydia dismounted and immediately sat down, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Caleb pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and handed her a share. She ate mechanically, too tired to taste it. Were they really Marcus's men? She asked after a while. Don't know. Didn't get a good look. Caleb chewed slowly, his eyes on the horizon. Could have been. Could have been bandits. Could have been nothing. You don't believe that? No. Lydia pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly cold despite the midday heat. How long before they catch up? If they're tracking us, day, maybe two, we're leaving sign, can't avoid it completely, but we're moving fast and I know this country better than most. He glanced at her. You know how to shoot? The question caught her off guard. A rifle? Yeah. A little. My father taught me when I was young, before he died. Caleb stood, walked to his horse, and pulled a second rifle from his saddle, smaller than his, older but well-maintained. He brought it over and held it out. This was my dispatch rifle during the war, lighter than the Spencer, easier to handle. Lydia took it, the weight unfamiliar in her hands. You think I'll need it? Hope not, but hope's not a strategy. He spent the next 20 minutes showing her how to load it, how to aim, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. His instructions were clear and patient, and Lydia found herself listening intently, trying to absorb every detail. Don't try to be a hero, Caleb said finally. If shooting starts, you get down and you stay down. Let me handle it. And if you can't, then you run, fast as you can, north toward the outpost. Don't stop, don't look back. Lydia met his eyes. I'm not leaving you behind. You will if I tell you to. No. Caleb's expression hardened. This isn't a negotiation, Miss Hartwell. If I go down, you save yourself. That's the deal. We didn't make a deal. We are now. They stared at each other, and Lydia felt anger rise hot in her chest. She'd spent her whole life being told what to do by men who thought they knew better. Her father, her stepfather, Clayton Brennan. She wasn't about to add Caleb Mercer to the list. No, she said again. Quieter, but firm. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. You're stubborn, he said. You're not the first person to notice. He almost smiled. Almost. They rested through the worst of the heat, then mounted up again as the sun started its descent. The land changed as they traveled north. Fewer trees, more open grassland that made Lydia nervous, too exposed. Nowhere to hide. But Caleb seemed unbothered. He kept them to the low ground, following creek beds and shallow valleys that wouldn't show their silhouettes against the sky. As twilight painted the horizon purple and gold, he led them into a hollow ringed by rocks and sparse brush. Sheltered, defensible, with sightlines in all directions. "We'll camp here," he said. "No fire." Lydia wanted to protest. The temperature was already dropping, and the thought of a cold night made her want to cry. But she swallowed the complaint and nodded. They unsaddled the horses, rubbed them down, and set out their bedrolls in silence. Caleb rationed out more jerky and hardtack, along with water from the canteens. It was the most depressing meal Lydia had ever eaten. "Tell me about the outpost," she said, just to break the silence. "What's it like?" Caleb leaned back against a rock, his rifle across his lap. "Not much to tell. Trading post, mail station, a few permanent residents. William Cross runs it. Good man. Fair." "You know him well?" "Well enough. Carried mail for him during the war when I was running dispatches. Saved my life once, in a snowstorm. I would have frozen to death if he hadn't let me hole up there for 3 days." Lydia absorbed this. "So you trust him? As much as I trust anyone." "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. Trust gets people killed. Caution keeps them alive." "Then why are you helping me?" The question hung between them. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening prairie. "Because sometimes caution's just another word for cowardice," he said finally, "and I've been a coward long enough." Lydia wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression stopped her. Whatever ghosts he was carrying, they weren't hers to exorcise. Night fell fully, and the stars came out in impossible numbers. Without the fire, the cold sank deep into Lydia's bones. She wrapped herself in her blanket and tried to sleep, but every sound jerked her awake. Wind in the grass, a distant coyote, the horses shifting. Across the hollow, Caleb sat with his back to a rock, rifle ready, keeping watch. "You should sleep," Lydia whispered. "I will. Later. You can't stay awake all night." "Done it before." Lydia sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "During the war?" "Yeah." "What was it like?" Caleb's silence stretched so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Cold, wet, terrifying, boring, all at the same time." "Did you—" Lydia hesitated. "Did you kill people?" "Yes." No elaboration, no justification, just the simple, brutal truth. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "Every day." The honesty of it hit her harder than she'd expected. She'd thought soldiers either gloried in violence or buried it so deep they never spoke of it. But Caleb was neither. He was just haunted, like her mother had been in those last few months before she died. "My mother used to have nightmares," Lydia said quietly. "I'd hear her crying in her room late at night. When I asked her about it, she'd just smile and say she was fine. But she wasn't. I could see it in her eyes." "What do you think she was afraid of?" "Marcus. Or what he'd do if she tried to leave." Caleb's expression darkened. "You think he killed her?" It wasn't a question. "I think she knew too much," Lydia said, "about his business dealings, about where the money was really going, and I think he got rid of her before she could tell anyone." "But you can't prove it." "Not yet." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "This thing at the outpost, the documents your mother left with William Cross, you think that's your proof?" "I hope so." "And if it is, what then?" Lydia hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Getting to the outpost was the goal. Everything after that was a fog of uncertainty. "I go to the law," she said. "Show them what Marcus did. Get justice." "The law doesn't always care about justice, especially when rich men are involved." "Then what am I supposed to do? Just let him win?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" Caleb shifted, his hand tightening on the rifle. "I'm saying you need to be prepared for the possibility that evidence won't be enough, that you'll get to the outpost, find whatever your mother left, and still end up with nothing." The words hit like a fist to the gut. Because he was right, and Lydia knew it. Marcus was connected, powerful. He'd made the sheriff look the other way when Lydia's mother died. Who's to say he couldn't do it again? "So what do I do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Caleb met her eyes across the darkness. "You decide what you're willing to fight for. and how far you're willing to go. Before Lydia could respond, Caleb held up a hand, his head cocked, listening. She froze. At first, she heard nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving fast. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, rifle up. Get down! Stay quiet! Lydia dropped flat, her heart slamming against her ribs. Through the sparse brush at the edge of their hollow, she could see movement on the ridge above. Silhouettes against the stars. 3 riders, maybe 4. They were searching. Caleb crouched beside her, barely breathing. His finger rested on the trigger, and Lydia could see the tension in every line of his body. Ready to shoot if he had to. The riders paused at the ridge, their horses dancing nervously. One of them said something Lydia couldn't make out, and another laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made her skin crawl. Then they moved on, following the ridge east. Caleb didn't lower the rifle until the hoofbeats had faded completely. Even then, he stayed tense, watching. That was them, Lydia whispered. Yeah. How did they get so close? We got careless, or they got smart. He finally looked at her. Either way, they're hunting us now, for real. Lydia's mouth went dry. What do we do? We don't sleep. We pack up and we move. They'll circle back at dawn, start a grid search. We need to be gone before then. Within 10 minutes, they were mounted and moving through the darkness, Caleb leading them northwest by starlight. The horses stumbled on unseen rocks, and more than once Lydia nearly lost her seat. But Caleb kept them moving, relentless. By the time dawn broke, they'd put another 5 miles between themselves and the hollow. Lydia was so exhausted she could barely think, but Caleb showed no signs of slowing. How much further to the outpost? She asked, her voice hoarse. If we push hard, we could make it by tomorrow night. Tomorrow night. Another full day of riding, another night of running. Lydia wasn't sure she had it in her, but she didn't have a choice. They rode through the morning, stopping only to water the horses and check for pursuit. The land grew rougher, more broken, deep ravines cutting through rocky hills, sparse vegetation clinging to red soil. Harder to track through, but harder to traverse. By midday, Lydia's mare was laboring, her breath coming in harsh gasps. Caleb noticed and called a halt in the shade of an overhang. She's done, he said, running his hands over the mare's legs. Pushed too hard, too fast. Can she make it to the outpost? Maybe, but not at this pace. Lydia felt panic rising. Then what? You ride with me. We'll lead her, let her go at her own speed. It wasn't ideal. 2 riders on one horse would slow them down, make them more visible. But it was better than being stranded. Caleb helped her onto his gelding, then swung up behind her. The proximity was awkward. Lydia could feel the heat of his body against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. Hold on, he said. They moved out, the mare trailing behind on a lead rope. The gelding handled the extra weight well, but Lydia could feel the difference in his gait. Slower, more labored. They were losing their advantage. As the sun began its descent, Caleb guided them into a narrow ravine with steep walls and a trickle of water at the bottom. He dismounted, helped Lydia down, and immediately started scanning their surroundings. We'll camp here, he said. It's defensible. You said no stopping until we reached the outpost. That was before your horse gave out. He met her eyes. We're sitting ducks out in the open. Here, at least, we can see them coming. Lydia wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She sank down onto a rock and let Caleb handle the horses, too tired to help. He worked in silence, efficient as always. Set out their bedrolls, rationed food and water, checked his ammunition. Then he sat down across from her, the rifle across his knees. I'm sorry, Lydia said quietly. Caleb looked up. For what? Slowing you down, getting you into this. I chose to help. That's on me, not you. But if I hadn't broken into your cabin, then you'd probably be dead by now, or worse. His expression was hard. Don't apologize for surviving, Miss Hartwell. It's not weakness to ask for help. Lydia looked down at her hands, raw and blistered from 2 days of hard riding. Everything hurt. Her body, her pride, her heart. What if we don't make it? She asked. We'll make it. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. And right now, belief's all we've got. The simplicity of it almost made her laugh, or cry. She wasn't sure which. They ate in silence as the shadows grew long and the ravine filled with twilight. Caleb built a small fire this time, just enough for warmth, hidden by the ravine walls. Lydia sat close to it, soaking in the heat. "Tell me about William Cross," she said. "What's he like?" Caleb poked at the fire with a stick. "Tough, fair, doesn't suffer fools. Lost his wife and daughter to cholera about 10 years back. Been running the outpost alone ever since." "You think he'll help me?" "If your mother trusted him, yeah. William's loyal to people who matter to him. And if the documents aren't there? If my mother never left anything? Then we figure out plan B." "What's plan B?" "No idea. We'll improvise." Despite everything, Lydia smiled. There was something reassuring about Caleb's straightforward pragmatism. No false promises, no sugarcoating, just honesty, brutal and clean. "You're a strange man, Caleb Mercer," she said. "Been called worse." They settled in for the night, taking turns on watch. Lydia tried to sleep during her off hours, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept thinking about her mother, about the letters she'd written, the secrets she'd kept, about the look in her eyes in those final months, fear and resignation mixed together. What had she known? What had Marcus done to keep her silent? And was Lydia really brave enough to face him again, even with proof? She must have dozed eventually because she woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "They're here." Lydia sat up, heart pounding. "Where?" "Ridge above us, at least 5 riders." Dawn was just breaking, the sky pale gray. Lydia could see the silhouettes Caleb was pointing to. Men on horseback, spread out along the ravine rim. "They found us," she whispered. "Yeah." Caleb's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Question is, do they know we're down here, or are they just searching?" As if in answer, one of the riders shouted something. Another responded. They weren't moving on. "They know," Lydia said. Caleb's jaw tightened. He checked his rifle, then looked at her. "Remember what I taught you. Stay low, stay behind cover. If I tell you to run, you run." "Caleb, no arguments, not now." The riders started down into the ravine, picking their way carefully over the rocky slope. Caleb positioned himself behind a boulder, rifle aimed. Lydia crouched beside him, her own rifle clutched in shaking hands. 5 men against 2. The math wasn't good. The lead rider reached the ravine floor and reined in his horse, scanning the area. He was a big man, heavy-set, with a thick beard and cold eyes. Behind him, the others spread out, surrounding their position. "Caleb Mercer," the man called out. His voice echoed off the ravine walls. "That you down there?" Caleb didn't respond. "Come on now. We ain't looking for trouble, just the girl. You hand her over, we'll be on our way." Still nothing from Caleb. The man sighed, a theatrical sound. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Marcus Hartwell just wants his daughter back. No harm intended." "Stepdaughter," Lydia said before she could stop herself. "And I'm not going back." The man's eyes fixed on her, and Lydia felt her skin crawl. His smile was predatory. "Well now, there you are, miss. Your daddy's been worried sick about you." "He's not my father." "Legal guardian, then. Same difference." The man shifted in his saddle. "Look, I understand you're scared, running off like that middle of the night, but it's time to come home. Face your responsibilities." "My responsibility is to not get murdered by Clayton Brennan." That got a reaction. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. The leader's smile didn't waver. "Now where'd you get an idea like that? Mr. Brennan's a respected rancher, upstanding member of the community. He killed 2 wives already. Accidents. Tragic, but accidents." The man's tone hardened. "You're coming back, Miss Hartwell. Question is whether Mr. Mercer here dies trying to stop us." Caleb's voice cut through the tension, flat and cold. "You'll have to kill us both." The leader studied him for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "If that's how you want it." He raised his hand, and Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the ravine like a whip, and the leader's horse reared, screaming. The man fought for control, cursing, and in that moment of chaos, Caleb fired again. The second shot took out the rider on the left. Not a kill shot, but the man went down hard, clutching his shoulder and yelling. "Get down!" Caleb shouted at Lydia. She dropped flat behind the boulder as bullets started flying. The sound was deafening in the confined space, ricocheting off rock, kicking up dirt. Lydia pressed her face against the ground, her hands over her ears. the rifle forgotten beside her. Caleb fired methodically, each shot deliberate. Another rider went down. The others scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and scrub. "How many rounds you got left?" Caleb called to her without taking his eyes off the rim. Lydia's mind went blank. She couldn't remember, couldn't think. "Lydia, how many rounds?" She forced herself to look at the rifle, to count. 6, maybe 7. "Make them count if you have to use them." The gunfire intensified. The remaining riders had found positions and were returning fire with purpose now, trying to pin them down. A bullet whined past Lydia's head so close she felt the displacement of air, and she bit back a scream. Caleb shifted position, moving to get a better angle. "We can't stay here. They'll flank us." "Where do we go?" "Deeper into the ravine. There's a split about 50 yards down, narrows to a passage. They can't follow on horseback." "What about our horses?" "We leave them." The words hit her like a slap. Without the horses, they'd be on foot in hostile territory, miles from anywhere. But Caleb was already moving, grabbing his saddlebag and slinging it over his shoulder. "Now, Lydia, move!" She grabbed her own bag and the rifle and ran, crouched low, following Caleb deeper into the ravine. Behind them, she heard shouting, the riders realizing they were making a break for it. Bullets chased them. One hit the wall beside Lydia's head, spraying rock fragments that stung her cheek. She stumbled, caught herself, kept running. The ravine twisted and narrowed, just as Caleb had said. The walls closed in, forcing them to squeeze through sideways in places. Lydia's bag caught on an outcropping, and she had to wrench it free, losing precious seconds. "Keep going!" Caleb was behind her now, covering their retreat. He fired twice more, and she heard someone cry out. The passage grew so tight Lydia thought they'd gotten trapped. She pushed forward, rocks scraping her shoulders, her breathing ragged with panic. Then suddenly the walls opened up into a small canyon, barely wider than the passage, but running north like a scar through the hills. Caleb emerged behind her, breathing hard. "Don't stop. They'll come through on foot." They ran. Lydia's legs screamed in protest, her lungs burning, but she forced herself to keep pace with Caleb's longer stride. The canyon floor was littered with loose stone that shifted underfoot, threatening to turn an ankle with every step. Behind them, she could hear the pursuers entering the passage, cursing, scraping, getting stuck in the same places she and Caleb had struggled through. It bought them time. Not much, but enough. The canyon opened onto a mesa scattered with juniper and sage. Exposed ground, nowhere to hide, but Caleb didn't slow down. He led them across at a dead run, making for a cluster of rocks on the far side. They'd almost reached cover when Lydia's foot caught on something and she went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just lay there gasping like a fish on dry land. Caleb grabbed her arm and hauled her up. "Come on! Come on!" She stumbled forward, half carried by his grip on her arm, and they collapsed behind the rocks just as the first rider emerged onto the mesa. 3 of them left, the leader on his big roan, and 2 others, one young, barely more than a boy, the other older with a weathered face and dead eyes. They spread out, rifles ready, advancing slowly. Caleb pressed his back against the rock, checking his ammunition. His expression was grim. "How many rounds left?" Lydia whispered. 4. 3 men. 4 bullets. The math was better than before, but still not good. "What do we do?" "We make a stand. No other choice." Lydia's hands shook as she checked her own rifle. 7 rounds, she'd said. She counted again. 6. She'd been wrong, or she'd miscounted in the panic. 6 bullets. Between the 2 of them, 10 rounds total. It had to be enough. The riders were maybe 30 yards away now, moving carefully, using what cover they could find. The leader called out, "Mercer, you're just making this worse for yourself. Give up the girl and I'll let you walk away." "No, you won't," Caleb called back. A pause. Then the leader laughed. "You're right, I won't. Marcus wants you dead for this. But I'll make it quick if you surrender now. Keep fighting, and I'll make it last." "Come get us then." The leader's smile vanished. He gestured to his men, and they began to advance again. Caleb raised his rifle, sighting carefully. Lydia watched his finger on the trigger, waiting for the shot. But he held it, tracking the leader's movement. 25 yards. 20. "Caleb," Lydia whispered. "Wait." 15 yards. The young rider broke from cover, trying to flank them. Stupid move. Caleb swung the rifle and fired in one smooth motion. The kid went down, clutching his leg, screaming. The other two dove for cover. 3 rounds, Caleb muttered. Lydia, you see the one on the left? Older guy, gray beard. She spotted him, crouched behind a juniper 20 yards out. Yeah. He moves again. You shoot. Don't aim for the body. You'll miss. Aim for center mass. Let the rifle do the work. I can't. You can. Same as we practiced. The gray-bearded man shifted, trying to get a better angle. Lydia raised her rifle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She found him in her sights, tried to remember Caleb's instructions. Breathe, squeeze, don't pull. The rifle kicked hard when she fired, slamming into her shoulder. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet to the man's left. Again, Caleb said. He fired at the leader, forcing him to keep his head down. You're pulling left, compensate. Lydia worked the bolt, chambered another round. Her hands were steadier this time. The bearded man was moving again, thinking she'd missed her chance. She aimed, breathed, fired. This time she hit him. Not a kill shot. She got him in the side, somewhere below the ribs. He went down hard, clutching himself, and didn't get back up. Lydia stared at what she'd done, her stomach lurching. Good shot, Caleb said. 2 rounds left for me. How many for you? She had to think about it. 4. 6 bullets between them. 1 man left, the leader, and he was the most dangerous. For a long moment, nothing happened. The mesa fell silent except for the moaning of the wounded. The leader stayed behind cover, calculating his next move. Then he called out again, and this time his voice had changed, less confident, more cautious. How much is she paying you, Mercer? Caleb didn't answer. Whatever it is, I'll double it, triple it. Marcus Hartwell's got money, real money. You could live comfortable for years. Not interested. Why? She's nothing to you, just some girl running from her duty. Why die for that? Because men like you make me sick, Caleb said flatly, and because she asked for help. The leader was quiet for a moment. Then, you're a fool. Been called worse. Movement. The leader broke from cover, firing as he ran, trying to close the distance before they could react. Bold move. Desperate move. Caleb's first shot missed. His second caught the man in the chest, but he didn't go down. Must have hit something non-vital, or the man was just too stubborn to die. He kept coming, raising his pistol. Lydia fired without thinking. Her bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, went to one knee. Caleb's final shot finished it. The leader fell forward and didn't move. Silence crashed over the mesa like a wave. Lydia sat there, staring at the bodies scattered across the ground. 3 dead, 2 wounded, and her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the rifle. Is it over? She whispered. Caleb was already moving, checking the fallen men, making sure they were down. When he reached the leader, he crouched and went through the man's pockets, pulling out papers, money, a pocket watch. For now, he said. But Marcus will send more. How many more? As many as it takes. The reality of it settled over Lydia like a weight. This wasn't over. It might never be over. As long as Marcus wanted her back, as long as she represented money and property and control, he'd keep sending men. She looked down at her hands, still shaking. She'd shot a man, actually pulled the trigger and watched him fall. The bearded one might be dead by now. She didn't know, couldn't bring herself to check. I killed him, she said numbly. Caleb straightened, walked back to her. You defended yourself. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah, he came for you with a gun. You had the right to shoot back. That doesn't make it feel better. It's not supposed to. Caleb held out his hand. Come on. We need to move before more show up. Lydia let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to hold her weight. They gathered what supplies they could from the fallen men. Ammunition, water, dried meat. Caleb took the leader's rifle, a better weapon than the one Lydia was carrying, and handed it to her. Your other one's empty anyway, he said. They left the bodies where they lay. The wounded men would either make it back to civilization, or they wouldn't. Lydia tried not to think about it. The sun was fully up now, beating down on the mesa with merciless intensity. They walked north, following the contours of the land, staying in what little shade they could find. Without horses, the journey to the outpost had just gotten a lot longer. How far? Lydia asked after an hour of walking. On foot? 2 days. Maybe 3. We don't have that much water. I know. They walked in silence for a while. Lydia's feet hurt in her riding boots, blisters forming where the leather rubbed. Every step was an effort, but she didn't complain. Caleb was carrying most of the weight, both saddlebags slung over his shoulders, plus the rifles. By midday, the heat had become unbearable. They sheltered under an overhang, rationing the last of their water. A few swallows each. Not enough. There's a creek about 5 miles north, Caleb said. If it's still running after the storm, that's our next waypoint. And if it's not running? Then we're in trouble. Lydia leaned back against the rock, closing her eyes. She was so tired. Not just physically tired, soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from running too long, too hard, with no end in sight. Why did you really help me? She asked quietly. Caleb didn't answer right away. When she opened her eyes, he was staring out at the horizon, his expression unreadable. I told you, men like your stepfather. That's not the whole truth. He glanced at her, something flickering in his eyes. No, it's not. So what is? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, During the war, I was ordered to burn a house. Family inside refused to evacuate. Said it was their property. They weren't leaving. My commanding officer didn't care. Said burn it anyway. Make an example. Lydia waited. I did it, Caleb continued, his voice flat. Followed orders. Burned the house with them inside. Woman, 2 kids. Heard them screaming the whole time. The horror of it settled in Lydia's chest like a stone. I told myself it was war, that I was just following orders, that someone else would have done it if I hadn't. Caleb's jaw tightened. Took me 5 years to admit I was just a coward, afraid of what would happen if I said no. You were a soldier. You didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. I just didn't have the spine to make it. He looked at her directly. So when you showed up in my cabin, running from men who wanted to drag you back to something that would destroy you, yeah, I helped. Because this time I could. The honesty of it, the raw pain underneath, made Lydia's throat tight. That doesn't make you a coward, she said quietly. That makes you human. Human's just another word for broken. Maybe, but you're trying to fix it. That counts for something. Caleb's expression softened, just slightly. You sound like someone who knows about being broken. My mother used to say we're all just cracks trying to hold water. Lydia pulled her knees to her chest. She was full of sayings like that. Pretty words that didn't change anything. You loved her? I did. Still do. Lydia's voice cracked. And I'm terrified that when we get to the outpost, there won't be anything there. That she didn't leave proof. That Marcus wins anyway. Then we make new proof. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. The simple confidence in his voice steadied something inside her. Lydia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They rested through the worst heat, then started walking again as the sun began its descent. The land grew rougher, more broken, deep washes cutting through red earth. In one of them, they found the creek Caleb had mentioned. Barely a trickle, but it was water. They drank their fill, refilled the canteens, and kept moving. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Caleb led them into a shallow cave tucked into a hillside. Barely more than a depression in the rock, but it would hide them from sight and block the wind. We'll camp here, he said. No fire again. Lydia was too tired to care. She sat down heavily, pulled off her boots, and examined her feet. Blisters on both heels, one of them bleeding. She'd have to wrap them before tomorrow, or she wouldn't be able to walk. Caleb dug through one of the saddlebags and pulled out a cloth. Here, tear it into strips. She did, wrapping her feet as best she could. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. They ate cold jerky and hardtack in silence as the stars came out. The temperature dropped fast once the sun set, and Lydia pulled her coat tight around herself. Without the fire, the cold sank deep into her bones. Come here, Caleb said. She looked at him, confused. He'd spread out both bedrolls side by side, overlapping them to create a shared space. Body heat. We'll freeze separately. Lydia hesitated. It was practical, sensible, but also intimate in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious. I don't bite, Caleb said dryly. She moved over, settled onto the bedrolls beside him. He pulled the blankets over both of them, and immediately she felt the difference, his warmth radiating against her back, blocking the wind. Better? He asked. Yeah. They lay there in this darkness, and Lydia tried not to think about how close they were, about how she could feel him breathing, feel the solid presence of him behind her. Tell me about the outpost, she said, just to break the silence. What happens when we get there? We find William, show him whatever your mother left, go from there. And if Marcus sends more men? William's got friends, connections. He can help protect you while we figure out next steps. You keep saying we. Caleb shifted slightly. You want me to leave after we get there? The question caught her off guard. Did she? She'd gotten so used to having him beside her, watching her back, that the thought of being alone again felt terrifying. No, she said quietly. I don't want you to leave. Then I won't. Simple as that. No conditions, no promises he couldn't keep, just a statement of intent. Lydia felt something ease in her chest. Thank you. For what? For not leaving me, even when it would have been smarter. Smart's overrated. She smiled despite herself. You're a strange man, Caleb Mercer. You mentioned that before. It's still true. They fell quiet. Lydia listened to the night sounds, wind in the rocks, a distant owl, Caleb's steady breathing behind her. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease. Lydia, Caleb said after a while. Yeah? What are you going to do after? If we get justice for your mother, if Marcus is dealt with, what then? She hadn't let herself think that far ahead. The future beyond survival seemed like a fantasy, something too distant to be real. I don't know, she said honestly. I never thought about it. My whole life was just waiting. Waiting for my father to come home from the war. Waiting for my mother to be happy again. Waiting for Marcus to leave us alone. I never got to decide what I wanted. You get to decide now. Do I? Yeah, that's what freedom is. Getting to choose your own mistakes. Lydia turned slightly, trying to see his face in the darkness. Is that what you did? After the war? Tried to. Didn't go well at first. Drifted for a few years, drinking too much. Fighting anyone who looked at me wrong. Then I ended up out here, took the route rider job, and it was the first thing that felt like it might actually be worth doing. Why? Because people need mail, letters from home, news from family, and I could deliver it. Simple, clean, no moral complexity. He paused. Until you showed up and complicated everything. Sorry. Don't be. I needed the complication. They were quiet again. Lydia felt herself drifting, exhaustion finally winning. Her last thought before sleep took her was that for the first time in days she felt safe. She woke to Caleb's hand over her mouth and his voice urgent in her ear. Don't make a sound. Her heart slammed into her throat. She nodded, and he removed his hand, then pointed toward the cave entrance. In the pre-dawn gray, she could see them. Riders. At least 6 of them, spread out across the hillside, searching methodically. Marcus had sent more men, and they were close. Caleb moved with silent efficiency, gathering their gear, checking his rifle. Lydia followed his lead, her hands shaking as she pulled on her boots. The blisters screamed in protest, but she ignored them. How did they find us? She whispered. Probably found the bodies, tracked us from there. Caleb slung the saddlebags over his shoulder. We need to move. Now. They crept out of the cave, staying low, using the rocks for cover. The riders were maybe 100 yards away, working their way closer. Caleb led them along the hillside, moving parallel to the searchers rather than away from them. Risky, but less likely to leave an obvious trail. They'd made it maybe 50 yards when a shout went up. One of the riders had spotted something, maybe their tracks, maybe the cave itself. Run, Caleb said. They ran, down the hillside, sliding on loose gravel, trying not to fall. Behind them, she could hear the riders mounting up, giving chase. Hoofbeats thundering, getting closer. The ground leveled out into a dry wash, and Caleb pulled her into it, using the banks for cover. They ran along the wash bed, rocks threatening to turn their ankles with every step. A bullet whined overhead, then another. Keep going! Caleb stopped, turned, fired 3 quick shots back at the pursuers. Lydia heard a horse scream and a man curse, but she didn't look back. just ran. The wash twisted, and ahead she could see it narrowing again, walls rising on both sides. Another tight passage, like the one before. They squeezed through, and this time Lydia didn't hesitate, didn't let herself panic. She pushed forward, ignoring the rock scraping her arms, her already torn dress catching and ripping further. They emerged onto another mesa, and there, Lydia's breath caught. Buildings. Maybe a mile away, clustered in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys. The outpost. There, she gasped. Caleb saw it too. Come on, we're almost there. Behind them, the riders were still coming. They'd have to dismount to get through the passage, but it wouldn't slow them long. Lydia and Caleb ran across open ground, completely exposed now. A bullet kicked up dirt to Lydia's left. Another hit a rock ahead of them, spraying fragments. Her lungs were burning, her feet bleeding. But she kept running, kept pushing, because the outpost was right there, so close. They were halfway across when Caleb stumbled. He caught himself, kept moving, but Lydia saw blood on his arm. You're hit. Just grazed. Keep moving. The outpost was getting closer. Lydia could see people now, coming out of the buildings drawn by the gunfire, men with rifles taking positions. And then, incredibly, they were being fired on from ahead. Bullets from the outpost laying down covering fire, forcing the pursuers to scatter and seek cover. The last 100 yards passed in a blur. Lydia's vision narrowed to tunnel focus, just putting one foot in front of the other. Caleb beside her, breathing hard, his arm dripping blood. And then hands were grabbing them, pulling them behind a barricade of overturned wagons. Voices shouting questions, rifles cracking as the outpost defenders returned fire. Lydia collapsed against the wagon, gasping, and found herself looking up at an older man with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes. Caleb Mercer, the man said, his voice gravelly with age. What in hell have you brought to my door? William, Caleb managed, still catching his breath. This is Lydia Hartwell. She needs... I know who she is. William's eyes fixed on Lydia with an intensity that made her shiver. Your mother's daughter. I can see her in your face. You knew her? Better than most. William looked past them at the riders who'd pulled back out of rifle range. And I know why you're here. Come on, let's get you inside before Marcus's dogs decide to try something stupid. He helped them to their feet and led them toward the largest building, a sturdy log structure with reinforced walls and narrow windows, a defensible position. As they stepped inside, Lydia allowed herself one moment of relief. They'd made it. But as she looked at William's grim expression and heard the gunfire still crackling outside, she realized the hard part was just beginning. Inside, the building smelled of wood smoke and coffee and gun oil. William bolted the heavy door behind them and crossed to the window, rifle in hand, peering out at the riders who'd pulled back to a safe distance. How many? He called to someone upstairs. 6 still mounted? A voice answered. Maybe more coming. William grunted, then turned his attention to Caleb's bleeding arm. Sit. Let me see that. Caleb dropped into a chair, wincing as William tore the sleeve away to examine the wound. It was worse than Lydia had thought. Not just a graze. The bullet had carved a furrow through the muscle, deep and ugly. You'll live, William said, but you won't be shooting straight for a few days. He looked at Lydia. You hurt? She shook her head, though everything hurt. Her feet, her hands, her bruised ribs from the fall. But nothing that mattered. Nothing that would kill her. William moved to a cabinet, pulled out bandages and a bottle of whiskey. He poured some on Caleb's wound without warning, and Caleb hissed through his teeth but didn't cry out. Those men outside, William said as he worked, wrapping the arm tight. They'll wait until dark, then try something, always do. Think they're clever. He tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency. But we've got 20 men here, all armed, all good shots. They try to rush us, they'll regret it. Marcus will send more, Lydia said quietly. Probably, but by then you'll be gone. William straightened, studying her with those sharp blue eyes. Your mother came to me 3 years ago, 2 weeks before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I was to give you something, made me promise. Lydia's throat tightened. What did she leave? Papers, letters, a ledger. William crossed to a locked chest in the corner, pulled a key from his pocket. Evidence that Marcus Hartwell wasn't just a rancher looking to expand his holdings. He was running something else, something your mother stumbled onto. He opened the chest and pulled out a leather satchel, worn and water-stained, handed it to Lydia. She took it with shaking hands. The leather was soft, familiar. Her mother's satchel, the one she'd carried everywhere those last few months. What was he running? Lydia asked. Stolen cattle, for one. Rustling operations across 3 territories, selling to buyers who didn't ask questions. Your mother found the books, saw where the money was going, but that wasn't the worst of it. William's expression darkened. He was also selling land that wasn't his, forging deeds, bribing surveyors, claiming property that belonged to families who'd been there for decades. When they protested, they had accidents, houses burned, people disappeared. Lydia felt sick. My mother knew this? She figured it out, started keeping records, collecting proof. And when Marcus realized what she was doing, William didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Lydia opened the satchel with trembling fingers. Inside were papers, dozens of them, letters in her mother's handwriting, columns of numbers, names and dates. And at the bottom, a thick ledger bound in cracked leather. She pulled it out, opened it. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, neat and precise. Dates, transactions, names she recognized, cattle buyers, land agents, officials in town who should have been investigating Marcus, but weren't, because he was paying them off. This is it, Lydia whispered. This is proof. It's evidence, William corrected. Whether it's proof depends on who's looking at it, and whether they care. Caleb leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his arm. The sheriff in town is on Marcus's payroll. Been that way for years. I know, William said. So's the county judge and half the town council. He looked at Lydia. Your mother knew that too. That's why she didn't go to them. She was planning to take it to the territorial marshal, federal jurisdiction outside Marcus's reach. But she died before she could, Lydia said. She died the day before she was supposed to leave. William's jaw tightened. Drowned in a river she'd crossed 1,000 times, in water barely deep enough to cover her knees. And the only witness was Marcus's foreman, who swore she slipped and hit her head. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of men talking outside. Lydia stared down at the ledger in her hands, trying to process what she was hearing. Her mother hadn't just suspected Marcus. She'd known, had evidence, had been ready to bring him down, and he'd killed her for it. Why didn't you take this to the marshal yourself? Lydia asked William. Because I'm a civilian with a grudge against a powerful man. They'd have dismissed it as hearsay. William sat down heavily in a chair across from her. But you're his daughter, his victim. You've got standing. And if you go to the marshal with this, with your testimony about what he tried to do, selling you to Brennan, sending men to drag you back, it becomes a pattern, evidence of a man willing to do anything to protect his secrets. Will it be enough? Caleb asked. Maybe, if the marshal's honest, if Marcus hasn't gotten to him already. William rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. But it's the only shot we've got. Lydia looked down at the papers, her mother's handwriting swimming in her vision. All those nights, all those hours her mother had spent locked in her room, writing. Lydia had thought she was writing letters to family back east. Instead, she'd been building a case, fighting back the only way she knew how. And it had gotten her killed. Where's the territorial marshal? Lydia asked. Capital City, 3 days' ride east. William looked at Caleb. You up for it? Caleb's face was pale from blood loss, but his expression was determined. I'll manage. You'll do more than manage. You'll get her there alive. William stood, crossed to a cabinet, and pulled out a gun belt and holster. Take this. And the bay mare in the stable, she's fast, doesn't tire easy. You'll need speed more than stamina. What about the men outside? Lydia asked. We'll handle them. Keep them occupied while you slip out the back. William checked his rifle. There's a ravine runs behind the outpost, leads east through the hills. Follow it for 5 miles, then cut north toward the main road. They'll expect you to run west or south. Going east catches them off guard. It was a plan. Not a great one, but better than nothing. Lydia carefully packed the papers back into the satchel, her hands steadier now. She had what she came for. Proof, evidence, a chance. But the weight of it felt crushing. William, she said quietly, did she say anything else? Before she died? William's expression softened. She said to tell you she was sorry, that she should have been braver sooner, that she should have taken you and run the moment she realized what Marcus was. She was brave, Lydia said, her voice breaking. She stayed to protect me. Maybe. Or maybe she was just scared. William met her eyes. Either way, she gave you a weapon. Now you have to decide if you're brave enough to use it. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. The riders were regrouping, probably planning their next move. William gestured to one of his men. Get them horses, supplies for 3 days, and be quick about it. The man nodded and disappeared toward the back of the building. Caleb stood, testing his injured arm. He could move it, but the pain was written across his face. Lydia wanted to tell him he didn't have to do this, that he'd done enough already. But she knew he wouldn't listen. You should rest, she said instead. At least for a few hours. No time. They'll be watching the outpost, waiting for us to make a move. We leave now. In daylight, we might catch them off guard. Or get shot before we make it 10 feet. That's why William's men are going to provide cover. Caleb looked at William. Right? Right, we'll keep them busy. Make it loud. William handed Caleb the gun belt. But you need to ride hard once you clear the ravine. Don't stop. Don't look back. 3 days to the capital, you said. Make it 2 if you can. The man returned with news that the horses were ready, 2 of them, saddled and loaded with supplies. William's bay mare and a sturdy roan gelding. Lydia slung the satchel across her body, the weight of it both comforting and terrifying. Everything her mother had died for, reduced to a bag of papers. Thank you, she said to William, for keeping this, for helping. Your mother was a good woman, deserved better than what she got. William's expression was grim. Make sure Marcus pays for what he did. I will. They moved to the back door where William's men were already in position. The plan was simple. Create a diversion at the front, draw the riders' attention, then Lydia and Caleb would slip out the back and make for the ravine. Simple, which meant a dozen things could go wrong. William gave the signal. His men opened fire from the front windows, a sudden barrage that made Lydia flinch even though she'd been expecting it. Shouts from outside, men scrambling for cover. Now, William said, go. They ran for the horses. Lydia mounted the bay mare, feeling the animal's nervous energy beneath her. Beside her, Caleb swung onto the roan with a grunt of pain, his injured arm held tight against his side. Stay close, he said, and ride hard. They kicked their horses into a gallop, bursting out of the stable and heading for the ravine behind the outpost. Behind them, the gunfire intensified. William's men were making it as loud and chaotic as possible, selling the diversion. The ravine was narrow and steep, forcing them to slow down. Lydia's mare picked her way carefully over loose rock, and Lydia held her breath, waiting for shouts, for bullets, for the whole plan to fall apart. But they made it into the ravine without pursuit. The walls rose on either side, blocking out the sky, and the sound of gunfire faded behind them. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only one. The ravine twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small valleys, sometimes narrowing to barely more than a crack. Caleb navigated it with the confidence of someone who'd been this way before. Finally, the ravine began to shallow out, and ahead Lydia could see open ground. Hills rolling toward the horizon, covered in sage and sparse grass. Caleb reined in at the ravine's mouth, scanning the landscape. See anything? Lydia asked. Not yet, but they'll figure out we're gone soon enough. He turned to her. Once we hit open ground, we don't stop until sundown. Understood? Lydia nodded, though the thought of another endless day of riding made her want to cry. They emerged from the ravine and headed northeast, pushing the horses hard. The land was rough and broken, cut through with dry washes and rocky outcroppings. No cover to speak of. If someone was looking for them, they'd be easy to spot. But the miles passed without incident. No riders on the horizon. No gunfire. Just the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and Lydia's own ragged breathing. By the time the sun reached its peak, Lydia was swaying in the saddle, exhaustion and hunger making her dizzy. Her blistered feet throbbed in the stirrups and every muscle in her body screamed. Caleb called a brief halt near a dried-up creek bed. They dismounted, and Lydia immediately sat down, not trusting her legs to hold her. Drink, Caleb said, handing her a canteen. And eat something. We've got maybe 4 more hours before dark. Lydia forced down jerky and hardtack, though it tasted like sawdust in her dry mouth. Caleb checked the horses, his movements stiff and pained. The bandage on his arm was soaked through with blood. "You need to rest," Lydia said. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through the bandage." "I said I'm fine." His tone was sharp and Lydia flinched. Caleb saw her reaction and his expression softened. "Sorry, I'm just—" He trailed off, looking out at the horizon. "We need to keep moving, that's all." They mounted up again and rode through the afternoon heat. The landscape changed gradually, the hills giving way to flatter ground, more vegetation. Signs of civilization, a fence line in the distance, a dirt road cutting through the prairie. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, Caleb led them off the road and into a grove of cottonwoods near a small stream. Actual water, not just mud. "We'll camp here," he said. "Get some rest. Start again before dawn." Lydia slid off her horse and nearly collapsed. Caleb caught her, his good arm around her waist, steadying her. "Easy. You did good today. I feel like I'm dying." "You're not. Just tired." He helped her to a patch of grass under the trees, then went to tend the horses. Lydia lay back and stared up at the leaves rustling overhead. The sound of water was soothing, and for the first time in days she felt something close to peace. It didn't last long. Caleb returned and sat down beside her, his face drawn. The bandage on his arm was completely soaked now, blood dripping onto the grass. "Let me look at that," Lydia said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're going to pass out from blood loss if we don't do something." Reluctantly, Caleb let her unwrap the bandage. The wound underneath was angry and inflamed, still bleeding steadily. Lydia felt her stomach turn, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We need to clean it properly," she said, "and stitch it closed." "You know how to stitch a wound?" "My mother taught me. In case—" She trailed off. In case something happened, and there was no doctor. Her mother had been practical like that. Caleb nodded slowly. "Do it." Lydia went to the stream, washed her hands, filled the canteen with clean water. Then she returned and carefully cleaned the wound, trying to be gentle but thorough. Caleb sat stone still, his jaw clenched, not making a sound. She'd never actually stitched skin before. Her mother had shown her on fabric, explained the technique. But fabric didn't bleed, fabric didn't flinch. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked. "No, but we don't have a choice." Lydia threaded the needle she'd found in the saddlebag, her hands shaking. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts, just do it." She took a breath and started. The needle pushed through skin with a resistance that made her nauseous, but she forced herself to keep going. Small, even stitches, just like her mother had taught her. Caleb's breathing went harsh and shallow, but he didn't pull away. By the time she finished, Lydia's hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie off the thread. But it was done. The wound was closed, no longer bleeding. She wrapped a clean bandage around it and sat back, feeling like she might throw up. "Not bad," Caleb said, his voice strained, "for a first attempt. I hope I never have to do that again. Makes two of us." They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Lydia pulled out the satchel, opened it, and looked through the papers again. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and heartbreaking. "You think the marshal will believe this?" she asked. "I don't know. Depends on who he is, what he values." Caleb shifted, wincing. "But it's more than most people get. A chance. What if it's not enough? What if we get there and he's like the sheriff back home, bought and paid for? Then we go over his head, federal courts, newspapers, someone will listen. And if they don't?" Caleb looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "Then we make them listen, whatever it takes." The determination in his voice steadied her. Lydia nodded and carefully put the papers away. They ate a cold meal and settled in for the night. Caleb insisted on taking first watch despite his injury, and Lydia was too tired to argue. She lay down on her bedroll and fell asleep almost instantly. She woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent. "Lydia, wake up." She sat up, disoriented. It was still dark, the moon barely risen. "What's wrong?" "Riders. 3 of them, maybe a mile out. Saw their campfire." Caleb was already gathering their gear. "They're between us and the road. Lydia's heart sank. Marcus's men? Probably. Could be travelers, but I'm not willing to bet on it. They packed in silence, moving quickly but quietly. The horses sensed the tension and shifted nervously as they were saddled. What do we do? Lydia whispered. We go around them. South, then loop back east. It'll add time, but it's safer than trying to run through them. They led the horses out of the grove on foot, moving slowly to minimize noise. In the distance, Lydia could see the flicker of the campfire Caleb had spotted. 3 figures sitting around it, silhouetted against the flames. They gave the camp a wide berth, cutting south through rough terrain. Once they were well clear, they mounted up and rode through the darkness, navigating by starlight. Dawn found them exhausted and off course, following a narrow trail through broken country. They'd lost hours, and Lydia could see the frustration in Caleb's face. How far to the capital now? She asked. 2 days, maybe more if we keep having to detour. Can we make it? We have to. They rode through this morning without incident. The land gradually became more settled, farmhouses in the distance, cultivated fields, roads that actually looked maintained, signs that they were getting closer to civilization. By midday, they reached a small town, just a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads, but it had a general store and what looked like a telegraph office. Caleb reined in, studying the town with narrowed eyes. We should stop, Lydia said. Get supplies. Send a telegram to the marshal. Let him know we're coming. Too risky. If Marcus has people here, we can't keep running blind. At least if we send a telegram, someone knows what we're doing. If something happens to us... She didn't finish the sentence. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we're quick. In and out. They rode into town, drawing curious looks from the handful of people on the street. 2 strangers on exhausted horses, both looking like they'd been through a war. Caleb dismounted outside the telegraph office, grimacing as his injured arm protested. You go in. I'll watch the street. Lydia went inside where a clerk looked up from his desk. Help you? I need to send a telegram to the territorial marshal's office in the capital. The clerk pulled out a form. What's the message? Lydia thought for a moment, then dictated carefully. Urgent. Evidence of fraud and murder. Marcus Hartwell. Arriving in 2 days, Lydia Hartwell. The clerk wrote it down, counted the words. That'll be $2. Lydia paid from the dwindling money in her pouch. The clerk tapped out the message on the telegraph key, the clicking sound oddly loud in the small room. Sent, he said. Anything else? No, thank you. She stepped back outside and nearly ran into Caleb, who'd gone tense. What? She asked. He nodded toward the far end of the street. 2 men had just ridden in, and they were looking around with the deliberate attention of people searching for something, or someone. Time to go, Caleb said quietly. They mounted up and rode out at a casual pace, trying not to draw attention, but Lydia could feel eyes on her back, and when she glanced over her shoulder, she saw one of the men pointing in their direction. They made us, Caleb said. Hold on. He kicked his horse into a gallop, and Lydia followed. Behind them, shouts erupted and the sound of pursuit. They raced out of town and onto the open road, pushing the horses hard. The 2 riders followed, gaining ground. Caleb veered off the road onto a narrow trail cutting through a stand of trees. Lydia stayed close, branches whipping at her face as they plunged into the forest. The trail twisted and climbed, rough and treacherous. One of the pursuing horses went down with a scream, throwing its rider. The other kept coming. They burst out of the trees onto a rocky hillside, nowhere left to hide. Caleb reined in, breathing hard, and turned to face their pursuer. The man emerged from the trees, rifle raised. End of the line, he called out. Give up the girl, Mercer. This doesn't have to get ugly. It's already ugly, Caleb said. His hand moved to his rifle. Don't be stupid. I've got you dead to rights. Then you'd better shoot straight. Time seemed to slow. Lydia saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Caleb start to raise his rifle, too slow, his injured arm betraying him. And she pulled her own rifle without thinking, aimed and fired. The recoil nearly knocked her out of the saddle, but she saw the man jerk backward, his shot going wild. He fell from his horse, clutching his chest. Lydia stared at what she'd done, the rifle still smoking in her hands. Ride, Caleb said hoarsely. Lydia, ride! She kicked her horse forward, and they ran again, leaving the fallen man behind. They didn't stop until sunset, when they finally reached the outskirts of the capital, a sprawling town with actual streets, buildings made of brick and stone, people everywhere. Civilization, safety. Maybe. Caleb led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, paid for a room with the last of William's money. They stumbled inside and Lydia collapsed on the bed, shaking. She'd killed a man. Actually killed him. Not wounded, not scared off. Dead. Lydia. Caleb sat beside her, his good hand on her shoulder. You did what you had to do. I shot him. He was going to kill me. You saved my life. I killed him.
Yeah, you did. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. And you'll carry that, same as I carry the people I killed. But you're alive, and that matters. Lydia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Does it get easier? No, but you learn to live with it. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Outside, the city hummed with life. Tomorrow, they'd find the marshal. Present the evidence. Hope it was enough. But tonight, Lydia just held on to the fact that they'd survived.
And that somehow, against all odds, she still had the strength to keep fighting. Morning came too soon. Lydia woke to pale sunlight streaming through the boarding house window and the sounds of a city coming to life. Wagon wheels on cobblestones, vendors calling out their wares, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The chase, the shooting, the man she'd killed. She sat up, her whole body protesting. Across the room, Caleb was already awake, standing by the window with his shirt off, rewrapping the bandage on his arm. The stitches looked better than they had yesterday. No fresh bleeding, though the skin around them was still angry and red. How's the arm? She asked. Hurts like hell, but it'll hold. He glanced at her. You sleep? Some. A lie. She'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, seeing that man fall from his horse over and over again. What time is it? Little past 7. Marshal's office opens at 8. Caleb pulled his shirt back on, moving carefully. We should eat something before we go. Might be a long day. They found a small restaurant down the street, crowded with early workers. Lydia forced down eggs and coffee while Caleb ate methodically, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Always watching, always alert. You think they followed us here? Lydia asked quietly. Maybe. Probably. Caleb took a sip of coffee. But we're in the capital now. Harder for them to try anything. Too many witnesses. That didn't stop them before. Before we were an open country. Here, there are laws, consequences. He met her eyes. The marshal's office is 2 blocks from here. We walk there, present the evidence, and let the law handle it. Lydia touched the satchel at her side, feeling the weight of the papers inside. Her mother's last act of defiance, reduced to a bag of documents. It had to be enough, because if it wasn't, she had nothing left. They finished eating and stepped out onto the street. The capital was bigger than any town Lydia had ever seen. 3-story buildings, paved streets, people everywhere. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like everyone was staring at her. Caleb stayed close, his hand never far from his rifle. They walked quickly, cutting through the morning crowd, until they reached a solid brick building with a sign out front, Territorial Marshal's Office. Lydia's heart hammered as they climbed the steps. This was it, the moment everything came down to. Inside, the office was sparse but clean. A desk near the front, filing cabinets lining the walls, a hallway leading to what looked like cells in the back. A young deputy sat at the desk, looking bored. Help you? He asked without much interest. We need to see the marshal, Caleb said. It's urgent. The deputy looked them over. Their trail-worn clothes, Caleb's bandaged arm, the dust still clinging to their boots. Marshal Thompson's in a meeting. You can wait or come back later. We'll wait, Lydia said firmly. The deputy shrugged and gestured to a bench along the wall. They sat, and Lydia clutched the satchel tighter, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Minutes crawled by. The deputy went back to his paperwork. Somewhere in the back, Lydia could hear voices, muffled by walls. Then footsteps in the hallway, and a man emerged. He was in his 50s, tall and lean, with gray streaking his dark hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He wore a badge on his vest,
and carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't need announcing. "Marshal Thompson," the deputy said, "these folks are here to see you." Thompson looked at them, and Lydia saw his expression shift, recognition, or something close to it, like he'd been expecting them. "You're Lydia Hartwell," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. How did you—" "Got your telegram yesterday. Interesting message." His eyes moved to Caleb. "And you'd be Caleb Mercer, route rider, war veteran. Got a file on you somewhere." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Thompson gestured toward his office. "Come on back. Let's talk." They followed him down the hallway into a cramped office with a desk piled high with papers and a single window overlooking the street. Thompson closed the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "So," he said, "Marcus Hartwell. That's a serious accusation." Lydia opened the satchel and pulled out the ledger, the letters, all the evidence her mother had collected. She laid it on the desk between them. "It's not an accusation. It's the truth. And I have proof." Thompson picked up the ledger, flipped through it slowly. His expression gave nothing away. He read several pages, then set it down and picked up one of the letters. "Read that too." The silence stretched. Finally, he looked up. "Where did you get this?" "My mother. She collected it before she died. She was going to bring it to you herself, but Marcus killed her before she could." "You have proof of that?" "No, just—" Lydia's voice cracked. "Just the timing. She was supposed to leave the next day, and she drowned in a river she'd crossed 1,000 times. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew your mother. Not well, but I met her once. About 4 years ago, at a cattle sale. She seemed smart. Careful." She was. "So when I heard she'd drowned like that," he shook his head, "it didn't sit right. But I didn't have jurisdiction. Local matter, local sheriff. I couldn't just waltz in and start an investigation." "The local sheriff works for Marcus," Caleb said. "I know. Half the county does." Thompson picked up the ledger again. "But this changes things. If even half of what's in here is true, Marcus Hartwell's been running a criminal enterprise for years. Rustling, fraud, bribery, murder." He looked at Lydia. "You understand what you're accusing him of?" "I understand he killed my mother, that he tried to sell me to a man who kills women, that he sent armed men to drag me back." Lydia's voice was steady now, all the fear burned away by anger. "And I understand that he'll keep doing it unless someone stops him." Thompson studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll need to verify some of this. Cross-reference the cattle transactions, check the land deeds, talk to some of these witnesses your mother listed." He tapped the ledger. "It's going to take time." "How much time?" Caleb asked. "A few days, maybe a week." "We don't have a week," Lydia said. "Marcus knows we're here. He'll either run or come after us. Let him come. This is my jurisdiction now. He tries anything in my city, I'll arrest him on the spot." Thompson stood, moved to the window, looked out at the street. "But you're right that he might run, which is why I'm sending deputies to bring him in for questioning, today, before he gets word that you've made it here." Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, fragile, but real. "What about Clayton Brennan?" she asked. "Him too. If Hartwell was selling you into a forced marriage, Brennan was complicit. We'll bring them both in, see what they have to say when confronted with this evidence." Thompson turned back to them, and for the first time, Lydia saw something in his eyes that looked like respect. "You did good, getting this here. Took courage." He looked at Caleb. "Both of you." "So what happens now?" Caleb asked. "Now you stay safe while I do my job. There's a hotel 2 blocks from here, the Harrison. Clean, secure. I'll have a deputy escort you there. Keep an eye on things." Thompson gathered up the papers, handling them carefully. "Give me 3 days. If the evidence holds up, I'll have warrants issued, and Marcus Hartwell will answer for what he's done." 3 days. It felt like forever, but it was better than nothing. They left the marshal's office with a young deputy named Carson, who looked barely older than Lydia. He walked them to the hotel, which was nicer than anywhere Lydia had ever stayed. Carpeted floors, gas lamps, a desk clerk who looked at their trail-worn appearance with barely concealed disdain. Caleb paid for 2 rooms with money Thompson had advanced them, and they went upstairs. Lydia's room was small, but clean,
with a real bed and a window that looked out onto the street. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel it. Relief, exhaustion, fear that it still might not be enough. A knock at the door, Caleb's voice. "You all right in there?" She opened the door. He stood in the hallway looking as worn out as she felt. "I'm fine," she said. "Just processing." "Yeah." He leaned against the door frame. 3 days. That's a long time to wait. What if something goes wrong? What if Marcus gets to the marshal, offers him money? Thompson doesn't strike me as the type who can be bought. But even if he was, Caleb met her eyes. We did what we came to do. Got the evidence to someone who can use it. Whatever happens now, it's out of our hands. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Lydia feel helpless. "I need to do something," she said. "I can't just sit here for 3 days. Then don't. Clean up. Rest. Eat real food for once." Caleb's expression softened. "You've been running for almost a week straight. You're allowed to stop." He was right, but stopping felt dangerous. Like if she let her guard down, everything would fall apart. Still, she nodded. "All right, I'll try." Caleb left and Lydia locked the door behind him. Then she did what she hadn't been able to do since this all started. She took off her filthy torn dress, washed herself with water from the basin, and let herself cry. For her mother. For the life she'd lost. For the person she'd become. For all the things she'd never get back. When the tears finally stopped, she felt empty, hollowed out, but also, strangely, lighter. She dressed in the one clean dress she'd brought, pulled from her mother's trunk before she'd fled, and looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Thinner, harder, eyes that had seen too much, but alive. Still here, still fighting. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. Deputy Carson stood guard outside their rooms, changing shifts with another deputy every 12 hours. Lydia ventured out only once to buy new clothes and supplies, and even then she felt exposed, expecting Marcus's men to appear at any moment. But they didn't. The city went about its business, oblivious to the storm brewing. On the evening of the second day, Caleb knocked on her door. "Thompson wants to see us," he said. "Now." Lydia's heart jumped. "Did he find something?" "Didn't say. Just asked us to come to his office." They walked through the evening streets with Deputy Carson trailing behind. The marshal's office was still lit, and when they entered, Thompson was there with another man, older, wearing an expensive suit and a severe expression. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Mercer," Thompson said. "This is Judge Aldrich. He'll be presiding over the case." The judge nodded curtly. "Sit down, please." They sat, and Lydia felt her stomach twist with anxiety. Thompson spoke first. "I've spent the last 2 days verifying the information in your mother's ledger. Checked cattle registrations, land deeds, bank records. Interviewed some of the witnesses she listed." He paused. "It all checks out. Every single transaction she documented, every bribe she noted, it's all real." Lydia's breath caught. "I've issued warrants for Marcus Hartwell's arrest on charges of fraud, cattle rustling, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder," Thompson continued. "Deputies are riding out tonight to bring him in, along with Clayton Brennan and several others named in the evidence." "What about my mother's death?" Lydia asked. "Can you prove he killed her?" Thompson's expression darkened. "That's harder. The only witness was his foreman, and the man disappeared 6 months ago, probably dead, but," he glanced at the judge, "we don't need a murder charge to put Hartwell away. The fraud and rustling alone carry significant prison time, and once we have him in custody, people will start talking. They always do." Judge Aldrich leaned forward. "Miss Hartwell, I want to be clear about what's going to happen. When this goes to trial, you'll be called to testify. You'll have to stand up in front of a courtroom and tell your story. Hartwell's lawyers will try to discredit you, make you look like a hysterical girl with a grudge. It won't be pleasant." "I don't care," Lydia said. "I'll do whatever it takes." The judge studied her, then nodded. "Good. Because this is going to be a fight. Hartwell has friends, money, influence. But he also has enemies, people he's crossed, families he's ruined. If we can get them to come forward, build a pattern." He sat back. "We can win this, but it won't be easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," Lydia said quietly. Thompson stood. "Deputies should reach Hartwell's ranch by tomorrow afternoon. We'll bring him back here, arraign him before the judge, and set a trial date. In the meantime, you two stay in the hotel. Stay safe. This isn't over yet." They left the marshal's office as full dark settled over the city. Lydia felt strange, lighter and heavier at the same time, like a weight had been lifted but replaced with something else. Responsibility. The knowledge that this was real now, that justice might actually happen. But that night, as she lay in her hotel bed, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what the judge had said, that Hartwell would fight, that it would be ugly. She was ready for ugly. She'd lived through worse. The next day dragged. Lydia paced her room, unable to settle, jumping at every sound from the street. Caleb knocked around noon, suggested they get lunch, but she couldn't eat. "You're going to make yourself sick," he said. "I can't help it. What if something goes wrong? What if he resists arrest? What if—" "Then Thompson handles it. That's his job." Caleb caught her hand, stopping her pacing. "Lydia, you did your part. Now you have to trust the system to do its part. What if I can't trust it?" "Then you trust that we'll deal with whatever comes. Together." His grip on her hand tightened. "You're not alone in this anymore." The simple statement made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Evening came, and still no word. Lydia was about to give up and try to sleep when someone pounded on her door. "Miss Hartwell?" Deputy Carson's voice. "Marshall needs you, right now." She threw open the door. "What happened?" "Just come, quickly." Caleb emerged from his room, and they followed Carson through the dark streets at a near run. The marshal's office was blazing with light, and when they burst inside, Lydia saw why. Marcus Hartwell sat in a chair, hands shackled, flanked by two deputies. He looked older than Lydia remembered, his face gaunt and hard. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, then rage. "You little—" "That's enough," Thompson said sharply. He stood behind his desk, arms crossed. "Mr. Hartwell, you've been arrested on multiple charges. You'll have your chance to speak at the arraignment tomorrow." Marcus's eyes never left Lydia. "You have no idea what you've done. I gave you a home, took care of you after your mother died." "You killed her," Lydia said. Her voice was steady, cold. "And you tried to sell me." "I was protecting the estate. That land was mine legally. It was my mother's, and you stole it." Marcus lunged forward and the deputies grabbed him, forcing him back down. He was breathing hard, his face red with fury. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "I have lawyers, friends. You think you can just walk in here with some papers and destroy me? I'll fight this. I'll win." "Maybe," Thompson said, "but you'll do it from a cell." He nodded to the deputies, who hauled Marcus to his feet and dragged him toward the cells in the back. Marcus shouted the whole way, threats and curses that echoed through the building. Then the cell door clanged shut, and the shouting became muffled. Lydia stood there, shaking, not from fear, from the sheer unreality of it. Marcus Hartwell, the man who'd controlled her life for 3 years, was behind bars. "We also arrested Clayton Brennan," Thompson said, "and 3 of Hartwell's associates. They're all being held pending trial." He looked at Lydia. "You did this. Your mother's evidence, your courage to bring it here, you did this." Lydia couldn't speak. She just nodded. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezed gently. The arraignment happened the next morning. Lydia sat in the courtroom, a grand room with high ceilings and polished wood, and watched as Judge Aldrich read the charges. Fraud, rustling, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, argued for bail, cited Marcus's standing in the community, his clean record, his deep roots. Judge Aldrich listened, then said flatly, "Bail denied. The defendant is a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. He'll remain in custody until trial." Marcus's face went white. His lawyer sputtered protests, but the judge's gavel came down with finality. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks passed in a blur. Lydia met with Thompson and the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sarah Miller, going over her testimony again and again. They prepared her for the defense's tactics, the ways they'd try to discredit her. Other witnesses came forward. Families Marcus had swindled, ranch hands who'd seen things they'd been too afraid to report. Even Marcus's former foreman's widow, who testified that her husband had confessed on his deathbed that Marcus had paid him to lie about Lydia's mother's death. The evidence piled up, and Marcus's empire began to crumble. The trial itself was brutal. Marcus's lawyer painted Lydia as a vindictive stepdaughter with delusions, questioned her character, implied she was lying for attention. Lydia sat in the witness box and endured it all, her hands clenched in her lap, her voice steady as she told her story. The jury, 12 men, most of them ranchers or merchants, listened intently. And when the prosecutor presented her mother's ledger, the documented fraud, the testimony of witnesses, Lydia saw their expressions shift. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Marcus Hartwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Clayton Brennan got 15. The others received varying sentences based on their involvement. When the verdict was read, Marcus didn't react. Just sat there, staring straight ahead, his world collapsing around him. Lydia felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just a bone-deep exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, asking questions. Lydia pushed through them without answering, Caleb clearing a path. They made it back to the hotel and up to her room, and only then did Lydia let herself collapse. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said, "it's over." "What do I do now?" Caleb sat beside her. "Whatever you want. That's the point." What did she want? For 3 years, her life had been defined by survival, by fighting, by running. She'd never had the luxury of wanting anything beyond making it through another day. "I don't know how to be free," she admitted. "Nobody does. Not at first." Caleb looked at her, and something in his expression was different, softer. "But you learn, one day at a time." Over the next few weeks, Lydia began the slow process of reclaiming her life. With Marcus's conviction, his assets were seized and liquidated. The ranch, Lydia's mother's ranch, was returned to her, along with a settlement from the court for the years of fraud. She had options now: money, property, freedom. She could go back to the ranch, try to rebuild it. She could sell everything and start fresh somewhere else. She could do anything. But when she tried to imagine going back to that place, all she saw were ghosts. Her mother's face, the years of fear, Marcus's shadow over everything. "I can't go back there," she told Caleb one evening. They were sitting in the hotel restaurant, picking at dinner. "I thought I could. Thought I'd want to reclaim it. But I don't. It's just haunted." "So sell it," Caleb said simply. "Use the money to go somewhere new. Build something that's actually yours." "Where would I even go?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking, my route rider contract is up next month. I could renew it, or—" He met her eyes. "Or I could try something different." Lydia's heart started to beat faster. "Like what?" "There's land opening up north. Homestead claims. Good water, decent soil. A man could build something there, if he had help." He paused. "And if he had a reason to stay in one place." The implication hung between them, fragile and hopeful. "Are you asking me to come with you?" Lydia asked quietly. "I'm asking if you want a partner, someone who'll work beside you, who won't try to control you or own you. Just be there. Build something together." Caleb's voice was steady, but Lydia could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "You don't have to answer now. Think about it." Lydia didn't need to think about it. This man had saved her life, had stood beside her when he had every reason to walk away, had shown her what it meant to be treated as an equal, not property. "Yes," she said, "I want that." Caleb's face broke into a rare, genuine smile. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They left the capital 2 weeks later, after the ranch sale went through and all the legal matters were settled. Lydia had more money than she'd ever imagined, and Caleb had his savings from years of route riding. Together, they headed north into open country, looking for land that called to them. They found it in a valley between 2 ridges, with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. The land was raw and untamed, but it was theirs. They built a cabin that first year, just like Caleb's old route rider cabin, but bigger, with 2 rooms instead of 1, a real kitchen, windows that let in light. They worked side by side, learning the land, making mistakes, figuring things out together. It wasn't easy. The winters were brutal and the first crop barely survived, but they persevered. And slowly, Lydia discovered what freedom actually meant. It meant choosing her own work, making her own decisions, failing without someone punishing her for it, succeeding and keeping the rewards. It meant being valued, being heard, being seen as a whole person, not just property or a burden. On their second spring in the valley, Caleb asked her to marry him, not because he owned her or wanted to control her, but because he loved her. Because they'd built something together that was worth making permanent. Lydia said yes. They married in the valley, with William Cross riding 3 days to stand as witness. No church, no ceremony beyond the words they spoke to each other. Promises to stand together, to build together, to weather whatever storms came. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments and hard times and days when the work felt overwhelming. Caleb still woke with nightmares sometimes, haunted by the war. Lydia still flinched at sudden movements, her body remembering the fear even when her mind knew she was safe. But they learned to carry those scars together, to be gentle with each other's broken places, to understand that healing wasn't about becoming who you were before, but about building something new from the pieces that remained. Years passed. The cabin became a house. The single field became several. They took in a few horses, some cattle, built a life that was simple but theirs. Lydia never forgot her mother. She kept the ledger, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder of a woman who'd fought back the only way she knew how, who'd given her daughter the tools to survive, even knowing she wouldn't live to see it through. And sometimes, in quiet moments, Lydia would look out at the land they'd built together and think about how far she'd come. From a girl fleeing through a storm to a woman standing on her own ground. She'd learned that justice wasn't always clean or complete, that winning didn't erase the cost, that freedom came with the weight of responsibility, the burden of choosing, again and again, what kind of person you wanted to be. But she'd also learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that the people who mattered would stand with you when it counted, and that sometimes the storm you run through doesn't just take you away from something, it carries you towards something better. One evening, as the sun set over the valley painting everything gold and red, Caleb found her sitting on the porch, looking out at the land. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "Yeah." Lydia leaned against him, solid and warm and real. "Just thinking. About how none of this was what I planned. I never imagined this life, never thought past survival." "Regret it?" Lydia looked at him, at the home they'd built, at the future stretching out ahead of them. Uncertain, maybe. Difficult, probably. But theirs. "Not for a second," she said. Caleb smiled and pulled her close. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out. Those same stars that had guided them across the frontier when they'd had nothing but hope and desperation. And Lydia realized that the storm that had torn her old life apart had also been the thing that carried her here. To freedom. To choice. To a life where she wasn't running anymore. She was home. And that finally was enough.